Attorney General Jack Conway is the Democratic nominee for Senate in Kentucky. He'll face Republican Rand Paul in November. Congratulations, Governor. You won that tough fight from Marciano. Let me ask you this. What do you got on, to put it bluntly, you must have your notion of beating Rand Paul. What's your best case that he's outside the mainstream, that he's too flaky, too Tea Party, whatever? What would you say?
I'd say just look at the statements he's made here in the last few weeks, Chris. He has stated that he would like to repeal the Civil Rights Act of 1964. He said that he would like to repeal the Americans with Disabilities Act and let the private marketplace take care of it. In a state like Kentucky, he wants to do away with the Department of Agriculture, wants to do away with the Department of Education. That's not what Kentuckians want. I mean, Kentuckians are angry like the rest of the country. They have fear, they have anxiety, they're concerned about jobs. But I'm frustrated too, Chris, and I think the central question here is, how do we use that passion? How do we use that anger? Do we use it to heat the building, or do we use it to burn the building down?
Well, you know, you just said something so incredible to me, having grown up during it. You're saying that this fella running for Senate from Kentucky, the United States Senate, wants to repeal the Civil Rights Act, which says you can't deny an African American a chance to use your bathroom at a gas station. You can't deny him the right to sit at your lunch table, your lunch cap. You're saying he wants to get rid of that law and let people be discriminatory again?
He made a statement in his editorial board interview with the Louisville Courier-Journal, Chris, said that we don't need a Civil Rights Act, that the Commerce Clause was interpreted too broadly, and that the private marketplace could take care of the civil rights needs of this nation. He said something to that effect. It's on a streaming video of the Louisville Courier-Journal. And Kentucky's come a long way. We have people who have bled and fought for the right to sit at lunch counters, for example, and that's not going to be acceptable in a place like Kentucky, and it's not going to be acceptable across the country.
Let's turn to our own Howard Feynman, senior Washington correspondent for Newsweek magazine, who mentions periodically here that he started his career in Kentucky. Howard, good evening.
Hi, Keith.
Rand Paul is blaming us for misunderstanding him when he said private businesses should be allowed to discriminate. When someone's running to be a federal legislator, does the media have the right to question him about his views on the role of the federal government, especially when it turns out he wrote letters to the editor that line up nicely with what he said last night, but the letter was in 2002?
Well, of course. That's why I was talking to my old colleagues at the Courier-Journal in Louisville, where I started out. They had an op-ed page board meeting there in April, and they asked him all these questions. And sure, they had a right to do it, and they did do it. And, you know, the interesting thing is that they published the answers, and they based their editorial in the Courier-Journal not endorsing either candidate in the Republican primary based on those answers. The interesting thing is that even Mitch McConnell's endorsed candidate, Trey Grayson, as far as I know, didn't make an issue of those comments. In other words, it wasn't a factor in the Republican primary in Kentucky. But I think the Courier-Journal and other people were right to ask about it. By the way, don't forget that Rand Paul basically announced his candidacy on Rachel's show a year ago. So it was fine for him then. It's not fine for him now.
Yeah, I guess that was a red herring, too. So the comments were made on that show to NPR, to 2 Kentucky newspapers. He's now gotten the Civil Rights Act involved, the Fair Housing Act, the Americans with Disabilities Act, too. We haven't mentioned that. He said he still disagreed with that on CNN tonight. He doubled down on that. He had a spokesman who had to resign in December because of the heavy metal band that he belonged to that dressed up in outfits that referenced the Ku Klux Klan. Is the sum total of everything here so potentially damaging? Because it doesn't seem like it's like these are the proverbial collection of isolated incidents here.
Well, it's always interesting, as the Sherlock Holmes used to write about, the dogs that don't bark.
Yeah.
I'm waiting to hear from Karl Rove on this one. I haven't heard him rush to the microphone to defend Rand Paul. That should tell you a lot. I think I called the RNC today. Michael Steele, the head of the RNC, he didn't really know much about it because he was traveling in Tampa, Florida. Tampa apparently not, being penetrated by the national media. The Republicans are hunkered down because they know that watching this guy cling to the last vestige of libertarianism on the Civil Rights Act is something that is not good for the Republican Party. Wolf Blitzer sort of backed him into the corner, but not fully, because as you did in your soundbite there, Rand Paul is still saying that the Civil Rights Act and its public accommodation stuff was necessary for the South in the 60s. Does that mean he doesn't think it's necessary now in the whole country? That question's still out there. The Republicans don't like that question being out there.
Potentially even banning contraception, too. So there's that. But that wasn't even the most amazing development in big government conservatism today. Did you see what Think Progress just posted from Rand Paul's last radio interview? Senator Rand Paul, who was supposedly the epitome of libertarian, small government, principled conservatism in the Senate right now, a man so enamored of individual freedoms that he questioned whether the government should even constrain people's right to discriminate on the basis of race. That's the whole basis of his hemming and hawing over the Civil Rights Act. He says he is such a free speech, individual rights purist that even anti-discrimination laws rub him the wrong way because they constrain people too much. Personal freedoms are that important to him. He wants to limit government's reach that much. Except for this.
I'm not for profiling people on the color of their skin or on their religion, but I would take into account where they've been traveling, and perhaps you might have to indirectly take into account whether or not they've been going to radical political speeches by religious leaders. But it wouldn't be that they are Islamic. But if someone is attending speeches from someone who is promoting the violent overthrow of our government, that's really an offense that we should be going after. They should be deported or put in prison.
If someone is attending speeches of the wrong kind, they should be deported or put in prison. Remember, this is a guy who's supposed to be the libertarian, principled, small government, free speech, conservative guy in the Senate right now. Government so small, it would put you in jail for the crime of listening to someone like Sharon Engel talking about overthrowing the government with Second Amendment remedies. So yeah, today there is also that. But maybe the biggest achievement in big government conservatism in today's news comes to us from the great state of Florida, where Governor Rick Scott just signed into law a requirement that thousands of Florida residents who have committed no crime, who are not suspected of any crime related to drug use or of drug use itself, thousands of Floridians will be forced by his state government to turn over their urine, their blood, or their hair to be tested by Rick Scott's state government proactively without suspicion to see if they are using drugs. He has already mandated this for public employees in Florida. Now Governor Rick Scott is mandating it for anyone who's applying for benefits from the government. In a state that is supposedly broke, Republicans who are supposedly for limited government will now have Florida taxpayers spending potentially hundreds of thousands of dollars a month forcibly acquiring the hair, blood, and urine of the state's residents so it can be proactively searched because the government says so. What conservatives say they want is small government. What they are working on this year is government that prohibits you from using contraception, that forcibly collects your urine, hair, and blood, and that puts you in prison or deports you if it does not like the speeches you attend. This stuff is happening all over, all the time now. This is what conservative governance is like this year. It sort of seems to me like this ought to be a bigger national story.